Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to another session of the Partnering to Crush the Curve series number 9, supporting SMEs during COVID-19 and beyond. As you're joining us this morning, please let us know by using the chat box what your name is and your organization and where you're dialing in from. Again, welcome to our Series 9, Partnering to Crush the Curve, supporting SMEs during COVID-19 and beyond. Good morning, everyone. At this point, I would like to ask our CEO from AVPA, Dr. Frank Aswani, to do the welcome address.
Thank you, Toyin. Yeah, thank you, Toyin. And everyone who's joining in, welcome. And as Toyin mentioned, as you come in, please just let us know in the chat group where you're dialing in from, your name, your organization. Would really like to know, the diversity of people who are part of the call. Thank you so much for making time to join us. This is a really critical part of our experience as a community and as a continent with regards to the pandemic. They always say we're probably a generation that will have the gift of the crisis. I think we'll emerge from this better and stronger. But for us to build back better, we need to be thinking about what are some of the key fundamentals that we need to get right. And, Africa specifically, touch wood, so far, our health crisis hasn't been that bad, but our economic crisis has been really significant. We've seen loads of job losses across the continent, struggling businesses closing. And that's why this conversation of today around supporting SMEs is really critical, especially with respect to Africa. So we are very keen to hear from the speakers today, as this is a core part of the recovery process that Africa will have to go through, is how do we make sure that our SMEs stay alive, stay resilient, and recover through the process? Because part of that, not only do they offer critical service to our communities, but they're also big employment generators. So very important that we see how and learn from people across multiple regions on what is being done across the continent with regards to supporting SMEs. As this series is the 9th, this is the 9th of the series of the webinars, and we are really proud for the work with a partnership we've had with SunCalc. AVPA is a network of social investors who are looking to really effectively drive up social impact in Africa by increasing the flow of human, intellectual, and financial capital into social investments in Africa. And we're very proud of this partnership with SunCalc. We've been doing this for the last couple of weeks. And we are running this in partnership with speakers from multiple countries. So today you will see the diversity of speakers who will be speaking. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Ariel. And thank you so much. We look forward to a really productive session.
Thanks so much, Frank. My name is Ariel Molino. I'm the lead for SunCalc Forum in Africa, and we're delighted to be continuing this partnership series with AVPA. This particular session is of real interest to us because we do a lot of work in supporting and facilitating investment for SMEs and small and growing businesses, and we do a lot of ecosystem building activities through the SunCalc Forum. So we hope you enjoy today's session. Welcome again to everyone who's joining. Thanks so much for putting into the chat box where you guys are from. Looks like a really great group today. And I will hand it over to Toyin, who is going to be our moderator for the day. So thanks again for everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Ariel, and to Frank once again. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. Please, as you're joining, let us know where you're coming from, meaning your organization, your name, your organization, and where you're dialing in from. We have some excellent speakers this morning. And before we go into our speakers, I think we're going to have a poll first, or should we go straight into our speakers before our poll? Fantastic. So we're going to have a poll first. So tell us what you think. What do you think governments should do to help SMEs survive the COVID-19 pandemic? Reduce taxes and tax rebates and tax reform, moratorium on bank loans and lending facilities, stimulus funds to cushion these small businesses and currency stabilization, or staggered purchase time as opposed to total lockdown. The government are already doing enough. So you select the one that you think is most relevant to the answer, and then we'll see what everyone thinks. Another 30 seconds. Again, thanks for joining. We're doing a poll question right now. Please select your answer, and we'll have the the results show up in about 5 seconds. All right. So, interesting. Wow. An overwhelming, everyone is saying that stimulus funds to cushion these small businesses and currency stabilization is what government should do to help SMEs survive the COVID-19 pandemic. 70%. Wow. So let's hear from our speakers now that we've talked about what government should do. Let's hear individually from our speakers. Coming up first is Mark Kaigwa from Nendo. So Mark, please, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Dr. Swani, and thank you, everyone. Glad you could all be here, and I'm happy to be here myself. So my name is Mark Kaigwa, and I'm the founder of Nendo, which is a research and marketing firm based in Nairobi in Kenya, but working across the continent and exploring different sectors and facets of our digital economy. And we've been doing this the last 5 years and have had the good pleasure and fortune to work across with projects spanning across 20 African countries, including Francophone and Lusophone Africa. So small team based out of Nairobi, but certainly with an African outlook and perspective. So what I'd like to share with you today, with the permission of, an invitation, I should say, of the team here, is my thoughts, my team and I, and what we'd published weeks after the first case of COVID-19 was announced in Kenya. We made some predictions, and we looked at 10 sectors of the economy and sought to come up with a point of view that we can start to look at and make and set expectations around corporates and consumers. And corporates in this case is not just big companies, startups as well, small and medium-sized enterprises as well. And this was just based on what we'd seen from the digital economy at the time. Next slide, please. So again, I won't read off of everything you see here, but the slides will be available to you. But these are the 10 sectors in full. And I will just highlight from 3 of them for purposes of our discussion today. So we did look at transport, retail, financial services, connectivity. You can see them right in front of you. But today, what you're going to hear from me is on transport, on retail, and on financial services. And those 3, for me, especially if we go by the poll we just heard, are each a great tell of what people expect. But what I find not often spoken about enough with COVID is what COVID represents and why it's different to any other type of recession that Africa or our economy has faced. There was a piece in the New York Times looking at how Africa's middle class is undergoing what, again, Africa is not a continent, but in the broader scheme of things, is the first recession of this kind at this scale of the last 25 years. And that says a lot just about the scale of how Africa has advanced economically and built up this middle class. But there's kind of 3 areas that make COVID-19, in my opinion, different to anything else before. And that's the fact that it's at first a humanitarian challenge or crisis, in that thousands of lives, hundreds of thousands, almost millions, if you look, have been lost. And I expected, unfortunately, to succumb to coronavirus and COVID-19. You have the economic aspects, and specifically on the economic part, why I'm going to take a look at these 3 sectors is because this is one of the first times we've seen a crisis, not just on the side of demand. So what normally happens if you look at 2008 or any of the large economic shockwaves that have hit different African countries, either the oil economies or generally the continent and the world as a whole, they tend to be on the demand side, meaning that you need to stimulate demand or you have depressed demand because people have less to spend. But in this specific case, why COVID-19 affects Africa and certainly the world in a much, much larger ways, because it also affects supply. And so, yeah, I think that's part of what makes this, and I know the term has been overused, an unprecedented time. But yes, so our report looks into this, and I've just seen somebody asking in the chat. The report is at our website, which is nendo, nendo.co.ke, so nendo.co.ke/COVID. And I can drop it in the chat once I'm done with the presentation. Next slide, please. So the first part we'll look at is transport. And this one, I think, speaks for itself. Thank you. Because we've seen what we're calling here disrupted demand and rising demand. So we have seen, for example, Kenya's national airline, not unlike many other airlines on the continent, which has put the majority of its staff on unpaid leave, has gone through what seemed to be extensive restructuring, or what's known as right sizing, or downsizing in a sense, and that can only be expected to continue. Many say that the future of air travel will involve, much like there were yellow fever certificates, similar certificates for COVID. So there's a question of who's experienced rising demand at this time. And in the beginning, I must say, it was I certainly considered the front lines of the delivery economy. So anybody who could get something for you, do something for you. And I know this, the content you see here does have a lot to do with Kenya, but we have benchmarked with some colleagues in Nigeria and South Africa as well, and seen very similar trends in terms of rising demand and disrupted demand. And so part of what we've seen over this time is, if you ride a motorcycle taxi or a boda boda or an okada, name it, any motorized form of transport that allows you to go out and get things on someone else's behalf, I consider you somewhat of an essential service, because you're allowing people to follow through with the aspects of social distancing at this time, which can be difficult, especially in low-income communities. But disrupted demand, anything where you had travel, mass transit, those look like they will continue to be challenging circumstances for especially for low-income communities. But this is a way to look at it, where if you're be able socioeconomically to go out and register to join some of these platforms, then that's something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. This again is pretty similar, so I'll go to the next slide. But all that looked at was location. So anybody in the location business, if you are helping people get a much better understanding of where goods and services are based and located across the continent, then you are actually at an advantage right now, like that company OK High. But there's also an element of where you'll struggle, purely because there's just not as much demand for people, just simply because their circumstances are limited economically. In terms of retail, any sort of digital platform where goods and services can be traded. So this is everything from informal Facebook groups of people looking to get rid of stuff in their house that they don't use, down to established e-commerce marketplaces like Jumia, Kilimall, Sky Garden, Konga in Nigeria, Take a Lot in South Africa. What we're seeing is that they're experiencing rising demand. Now, we were talking to a player in this space, and they said they still experience rising demand, but they're seeing smaller basket sizes. And that speaks to just the acute economic circumstances that are basically affecting members of society. What we did think is that certainly the local kiosk, the local market, the small standalone shop in your neighborhood, that's a place where people may be more inclined to go for smaller groceries and things of that nature when they're not having a big supermarket deliver to them. And that's something for us to keep in mind between disrupted demand for shopping malls. And we have a shopping mall that's one of our clients. And so we have had to do a lot of thinking about what is the tenant experience, because some of them have unfortunately had to leave. What is the shopper experience? How can we keep it absolutely safe for them? And then what do we communicate at this time? We can't just stimulate purchase. We have to actually be sensitive to the times. And that's something for us to keep in mind. Next slide, please. And so in terms of rising demand, something interesting here is that you may start to see more pay-as-you-go players. And so you have pay-as-you-go for solar, meaning instead of me paying a monthly electrical bill, I prepay on a daily basis. You also have liquefied petroleum gas, also known as LPG, and companies like Envirofit, Pago Energy, and MGas. These are companies saying that, look, we will provide you the infrastructure and you'll pay, let's say, a couple US cents to fry an egg. You'll pay per meal, pay as you go. And so that as a business model is picking up, and we can expect that to be something that stays over the coming years as we might see it as we come out of the effects of COVID-19. Next slide, please. The final part of my series of thoughts here are on the side of mobile money and financial services and payments. And so we've seen a number of different measures taken here, I should say. I mean, one of the ones that has stood out to me is the Kenya Central Bank, owing to the proliferation of mobile money, has allowed and sanctioned for transactions under $10 to be to essentially have the fees waived. And then you have on this other side the desire to move away from cash, so explicitly pushing people towards using mobile money and cards as a means of payment. Now, Kenya is one of the few countries on the continent where this sort of declaration can be made by the central bank and adhered to. But I think for me, the people suffering now are some of the ones who are what I would call either underconnected or tech illiterate, or just less sophisticated in terms of their tech usage, because their banks are restricting their ability to visit or to interact with cash. But for some of them, shifting towards online banking or mobile banking may not be as smooth of a process. And they may have the smartphone, they may actually have the income, but it's that actual functional literacy. So how do I go about this in a safe and secure way that presents challenges? So for me, if I'm to wrap up, I think for SMEs across the continent, one of the big challenges, as I said, is whomever you're targeting, this idea of transport and how you do the last mile delivery to them, as opposed to perhaps being open. We're seeing in the US, there was a study done with, I think, Johns Hopkins data and Chase Bank in the United States that showed that indoor seating for dining correlated, unfortunately, with a rise of coronavirus cases. So even as restaurants and businesses try to open back up, there are still a number of challenges still there. And so until we get mass testing and certainly some structures in place to support people socioeconomically, that depressed demand because of less money in the wallet that has to stretch just as long will continue to be with us. But the hope is from this is that we see sectors where there's some rising demand, and provided there can be supply of just goods and services, that can be met and delivered to people. And so my hope really is we'll continue to study this from our side with just looking at public data from social media, looking at startups and different players across the ecosystem. And yeah, I'd be happy to take any questions and perspectives you have. But in our view, this from the consumer and from the corporate perspective is where we're seeing disrupted demand, diminished demand, and rising demand. And so, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to share these remarks with you. And thank you, and back to you, Toyin.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was quite insightful. Thank you for sharing, again, like you mentioned, the rise in demand and disruption in transportation, retail, and also in financial services. And those are very important information to have in terms of small businesses and what they need to know in terms of thriving during this COVID-19 period. So with that, we'll move on to our second poll of today. So tell us what you think. What operational and or strategic implications has the COVID-19 pandemic had on your enterprise, business, or organization? So the answers include: we've opened new business streams, we've limited focus to core business activities, we've had to lay off some of our staff, meaning downsized, we've had to pause some business activities, we've had to pause all business activities, we've had to digitize service offerings and business operations, or we're rethinking logistics and other business processes. Please answer the question, and in about 30 seconds, we'll give the answer. And while you're answering the question, I just want to remind everyone again, and I want to welcome everyone who joined us during the time that Mark was speaking. And as Mark said, his slides and his report has already been placed in the chat room, but we will make all of that available after the webinar today. So, welcome everyone, and please put your questions in the chat box as well. Thank you. 5 more seconds. All right, I think we can close this poll question and stand by for the results. Another interesting one. So the two highest one, the highest one is we've had to digitalize service offerings and business operations. And the second highest is we've had to pause some business activities. So not surprising at all. All right, so moving on to our next speaker, who, different from Mark, is actually one of our SMEs who's living the life of the SMEs. So our next speaker is Ebun Feludu, who is the CEO of Jam, the coconut food company. Ebun, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Yes, like Tony said, my name is Ebun Feludu, and I run Jam, the coconut food company, which is a company started by my children, but I kind of yanked it off them when I saw a bit of potential. And essentially, what we do is we produce a wide range of beauty and food products out of the world's most famous superfood, which is the coconut. So we've got skincare range and we've got food range, you know, and all of that. And so when Tony said share your story, one of the things that immediately came to mind was the first challenge that hit us when the pandemic broke, and you know, the first wave of the lockdown in Lagos State, where I'm based. And over the last 4 years, we've been running the company for 4 years now. We've basically developed, you know, various products as a response to people's feedback and needs in terms of application of the coconut. And one of those products was our coconut cinnamon balls. And we had stalled for a really long time, and basically finally made a huge investment into our packaging of this product. Because we've done the marketing, we've done the testing in Nigeria and across the world, and you know, it was very much loved. And so the packaging arrived in March, late March, just when the government was saying lockdown, lock everything down. And we said to ourselves, okay, so what do we do? You know, we had timelines to deliver on, we had funds invested in this. We had two choices: either sit down, lock up, and just kind of wait to see how, you know, things would go, or just sort of really get into the fray. We have two factories, one in Okwaja and one in Badagry. Those are kind of two coastal areas in Lagos where, you know, there are coconut hubs. And a lot of our staff we brought them in from out of town. So we provided accommodation for them and just basically had them stay there and simply produce. So they kept on producing. And what we found was the consumer trend was that people were snacking a lot, either from being nervous or just from being at home, not having, you know, a lot to do. And I guess people were still quite liquid. And so we had our factory staff producing, and basically my husband and I were just basically on the road with our protective gear and supplying the products, even though brand new, so supplying them to supermarkets. And at this time, supermarkets, because of the lockdown, didn't have a lot of foreign alternatives, or even the local manufacturers weren't really meeting their production capacity and all of that. And they were basically just sort of grabbing our products and putting it on their shelves. And over lockdown, we had to supply, you know, repeatedly and just basically restock with them. So those were the two options, you know, available to us. And we basically went for, you know, just sort of getting in the fire, you know, with what was presented to us. And it turned out to be a huge success, because right now, even though this is a brand new product, we're unable to meet demand, and we're stretching ourselves to increase our production capacity. We've got people from the UK who are ordering, who are, want to be our distributors. We've got distributors in different cities in Nigeria. And something really interesting is going on right now. Like a lot of my friends who are fashion designers and things like that, whose businesses have shut down, they've basically pivoted, right? And just goes to what you were saying, Mark, they now run online supermarkets with their WhatsApp status, with their Facebook. And it's shocking to me that many of these individuals are actually doing more volume than the supermarket outlets that we have. So they basically turned their WhatsApp status into supermarkets, and they're promoting, different products and saying, listen, stay at home, we've got your groceries and we can deliver these things to you. And that has really been amazing for us, because not only do we have the supermarkets and the distribution outlets, we also have these individuals who are taking on cities and taking on, just sort of pockets of spaces and pushing the products, in those areas. Yeah. So slide 2, I see you're already on slide 2. So basically those two options were, the result was that we had to increase our capacity at the factory in order to meet demand. If we had sat back to just sort of wait and just kind of see how things went out, we would have lost that golden opportunity to get into the market when the outlets had very few options, and when people were looking for a comfort food or a comfort snack, or they were just ready to spend money on snacks and that sort of thing. So that's what we chose to do. And so on to the next slide, slide 3. What lesson did we learn from COVID? There's a guy I follow, I'm sure many entrepreneurs in Africa know him, Vusi Thembekwayo. I think he's a brilliant, absolutely brilliant guy. And he'd done some interviews with Formula One racers. And he found people who were constantly winning, right? And we wanted to know, what is the formula behind your success? And one of those people said to him, listen, everybody slows down at the curve. At the bend, right? Everybody else slows down. And what he does is he speeds up when he gets to the curve. And I think this is what a lot of entrepreneurs kind of need to learn, to be nimble and really be on top of their game when everything else is slowing down. And so you can sort of look ahead and see what's going on after the curve, and so you can sort of pace yourself and move accordingly. So the next slide, please. So many people have asked me this, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs will always say, I need capital, I need capital. But this is my view. My view is develop a brilliant product and work out your network, your distribution channel, and capital will look for you. Because over the last 4 years, what we've done is develop products. And I wish I had a chance to share our catalog with you so you can see the range of products which are responsive to people's needs. And then we've also developed distribution channels. Another thing that COVID has taught us is you cannot depend on just one distribution outlet, because a lot of my friends who had farms, like chicken farms and all of that, whose customers were hotels and schools, were forced to bury eggs during the lockdown because their singular market was shut down. And so this has taught us to make sure you vary your distribution channel. Don't depend on just like the supermarket chains or just your one-on-one customers. Vary that so that you have a bit of wiggle room when this sort of things happen. And so that's, I believe that cash will come to you in this time. So over COVID, we've had a significant injection of cash into our business because of all of this. We've been nimble, we've been able to develop the product and even work on our distribution channels. And we've gotten investments over the last 6 weeks or so into our business. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ebon, and really insightful in terms of your journey And thank you also for sharing your some of the things that you've learned along the way that I think applies to not just small SMEs, but also any business really, in terms of having great products or services, you know, adding that to a great distribution channel or a great network, and then, you know, on the other side comes capital. So that's very insightful. And then, of course, as a former athlete, I have to also say that I love the, you know, what you've learned from the gentleman that you follow, that to win, you need to speed up at the curve. And I have to tell you, as a 400-meter runner, that's exactly what has to happen. And I think it's a great metaphor for all the work that we're all doing and what SMEs are trying to do during this time and what they would need to do as we move into the recovery and resiliency phase around this pandemic. So with that, I want to again welcome everybody again for the last time. I see that our numbers continue to grow, so I'm welcoming everyone and to our session on supporting SMEs. And we hope that you're putting your questions on our in the chat box. So at this point, without any further ado, I'll bring on our last speaker, Jason.
Oh dear, did we lose Toyin?
Uh-oh. Can you?
No, Nancy, Toyin, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, fantastic. And can you see me? Because I can't. All right. So
Yeah.
we're moving on to the next speaker, Jason Goldberg, who is the CEO of 10X Entrepreneur. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you, Eben, for that great story. It's great to get a really positive story in these times. By the way, I'm one of those consumers that has been snacking a lot, and I would love to trial your superfood sometime. You're also in the 5% roughly of small businesses that are doing really well in this time. So well done. Unfortunately, you're in the minority, and in our research, 90% of small businesses are on the other side. They're adversely impacted to different degrees and most substantially. The majority of small businesses have lost over 30% of revenue, which is devastating to small businesses that on average have less than 15 days of cash flow reserves in their businesses. And so we at Edge Growth, and 10X Accelerator is a subsidiary of a group called Edge Growth. You know, we've invested in 50 odd small businesses in South Africa. We support about 200 through mentoring. And very early on in this crisis, we could see the train coming down the tracks for small businesses. And so we asked ourselves the question, you know, how can we help the most businesses on this continent as much as possible? And so we were fortunate to receive sponsorship from First National Bank in South Africa to build the CEO Field Guide, a field guide to lead through this crisis. And we partnered with them to bring it completely free, completely open to all small businesses on the continent. It's an extensive field guide on exactly how to lead through the crisis, phase by phase, and for each phase of the crisis, what to do, how to do it, and downloadable tools and templates. And you know, while I won't be giving you a demo in this webinar, you'll get these materials after the webinar, and you can click on this link and go to the CEO Field Guide, and I'll put a link into the chat box later on as well. As I said, it's completely free, no strings attached, no fine print, and we're not collecting your data and selling it and telling everyone we're not. The goal of the Field Guide is simple. For many small businesses, speed and precision of leadership will determine survival or non-survival. And so we want to give CEOs speed and precision. If you've never led through a crisis like this, how do you know what to do? When the decisions are big, they're complex, the environment is uncertain, and you've never done this before, how do you act with confidence and make big decisions that affect a lot of people's lives for a long time confidently and fast and execute quickly? It's asking a lot of entrepreneurial leaders. And so we wanted to give, in a way, an intravenous drip of confidence and clarity to CEOs through this CEO Field Guide. And we've got a lot of amazing contributors providing expertise on all the topics you would need: leading self, leading team and culture, leading company, and within company, all the topics you'd expect: people and culture, finances, liquidity, scenario planning, managing customers, etc. It's all there and it's all free. So with that, what have we learned through these last 3 months of having provided this field guide to small businesses, along with supporting webinars, which have not been content-based webinars, they've been interactive sessions to engage other CEOs and experts on a range of topics live and in real time through Q&A. What have we learned? Next slide, please. We learned a couple of things. So obviously the first is that of knowledge will compensate for just running out of money. Cash still is king. Knowledge matters, but just slightly less than cash when you run out of cash. And so nothing will compensate for lack of cash flow. And the top priorities in supporting small businesses have to be around supporting their turnover. So doing everything possible to buffer impact on turnover. It's kind of still the #1 driver of cash flow in most small businesses. And yes, there's a lot that small business owners have to do to manage cash flow and can make a difference. But fundamentally, if revenue drops by 90%, that's going to be the definitive factor. So nothing will compensate for lack of cash flow. And in policies and in kind of small business support programs, cash flow does need to be the first consideration. By the way, that's why in the Leadership Field Guide platform, the central focus is always liquidity. The central issue we're trying to help small business with is manage liquidity and maximize liquidity, and all the other things you have to do that. The second interesting thing that we've learned is that those who are in the business, running the business, and those who are outside the business, invested in or supporting the business, have the same view about the short-term crisis, but a different view, and particularly a different level of seriousness of their concern about the long-term challenges and the urgency of drastic action required. We're finding many CEOs are to a degree in denial about how long they can expect adverse impact on their turnover. Many are, being optimistic and hoping for a rapid bounce back, and not taking really dramatic action to kind of create longer runway. And we're finding that the, funders, mentors, board members in the same businesses are much more concerned about the lack of really rapid decision making around some fundamental changes that have to be made to support the survivability of these enterprises through what's probably going to be a prolonged economic crisis. That's the second key lesson, which is why lesson number 3 has become so pronounced, which is that this digital platform, helpful as it is, and we've really, entrepreneurs have said wonderful things about how helpful it is, actually, it's most helpful when it's augmenting mentorship. So what we've seen is that many small business owners, CEOs, have moved down to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy in terms of their psychology and running their business, and a very survival-oriented, short-term oriented, reactive, and that's not a really productive mental space to engage in a digital platform for help. Really, they want human interaction. And so as much as we've tried to give them world-class support for free, the bottom line is human support is still very important for particularly distressed small businesses. And so we'd like our platform mostly to be helping mentors that are mentoring small businesses already. Fourth key lesson, many of these tools entrepreneurs wish they had before this crisis. So just good disciplines around cash flow, projection, forecasting, it's basics stuff, but most small businesses still don't have these disciplines in their businesses, and they're saying, gee, I wish I was doing this 6 months ago, and I'm going to keep using these tools after the crisis has passed. Time will tell. And then lastly, we found another surprising, very helpful format for helping small business owners is the unstructured webinar, where there's, a loose topic and no agenda and no plan. It's entrepreneurs getting together around a topic and sharing experiences and insights and connections and links and basically being group therapy towards each other. We found that to be an extremely valuable support, medium alongside the platform, because frankly, a lot of CEOs, we've heard it many times, feel alone. They've got no one else to ask, no one to talk to, and frankly, just being in a room, a virtual room even, with others living through similar difficulties just gives them more resilience, psychological and emotional resilience to keep going. So we found that very helpful as well. Next slide, please. I was asked to pull together a slide on help needed. So this platform is out there and it is free, and that's already the case and will stay the case. But how could this be more valuable to more small businesses? So 4 things. Firstly, wherever you are in whatever country you are, whatever you can do to mobilize liquidity support for entrepreneurs at scale is probably kind of the number one important thing to do to help as many of our small businesses survive this crisis as possible. And I use that word survive. Unfortunately, I don't want to be using it. Our business is scaling companies, but unfortunately, we've had to pivot too. And surviving is the new scaling. And so we need to really be thinking of how do we help the majority of our small businesses survive this crisis. So that's number one: mobilize liquidity support from government, DFIs, etc. Number 2, mobilize mentors at scale, seasoned, business leaders and CEOs who just volunteering hours, pro bono hours, and we'd be glad to make our field guide available to those mentors. Again, just completely free. Use this as a basket of tools if it's helpful. But really, we want to see mentors helping CEOs lead through this crisis. And so local mentorship movements are needed. The Rwanda chapter of entrepreneurial mentors, the Nairobi chapter, and so on. So wherever you are, think about a role that you could play in mobilizing mentors at scale. Thirdly, we think that this platform would be better if there were sector-specific versions of it, if there were an renewable energy sector, a fintech sector version, because those sectors are facing unique versions of the COVID crisis. Their trading conditions are affected in different ways. And so to the extent that content could be, hyper-contextualized to, renewable energy in East Africa, for example, that would be even more valuable to the entrepreneurs benefiting from the platform. And if any of you want to partner in creating sector-specific versions, we'd like to talk about that. And relatedly, geographic-specific versions, because the crisis will unfold at different times, creating different macroeconomic scenarios, which ultimately kind of roll down into, industry scenarios and business scenarios, and having insight into that causality, starting with macroeconomic context, is really important and at a gap right now in the platform. So I'll leave it there and hand the mic back to you, Toyin.
Toyin, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to, again, highlight some of what Jason shared with us. Welcome again, everyone. I just noticed that we've gone up another 4 participants from the last time before Jason started to talk about what they're doing around advisory and facilitation for entrepreneurs and small to medium-sized businesses, really kind of supporting them with non-financial help in terms of the work of SMEs, and really looking at mobilizing funds, helping to provide mentorship to CEOs, ensuring that they have the processes in place and that will help them to, again, access the, make sure that their cash flow is going well even during this pandemic. And it's interesting for everyone to understand that Ebun's story before Jason came on, like he said, it is a minority. So she's one of the few SMEs that are making a difference. Oh, I mean, not making a difference. I mean, making some a difference in terms of profit during this pandemic, even though there are a lot more who are struggling in terms of how to pivot their business and figure out a way to make sure that they, again, keep their staff, keep the business thriving even during this difficult time. So thank you very much, Jason, for your perspective around non-financial support that SMEs need in order to thrive. So at this point, I just want to, again, encourage everyone. This is our 9th series, and we would like to know what else you want us to focus on in series to come and other webinars or, opportunities that we will have to, support or continue to build the ecosystem during this pandemic and beyond. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for questions, and we're going to start with a question that was already placed in the chat box, and I'm going to field this question to everyone, and it goes like this: how are SMEs and it says in the fish industry coping and with fish and fish products in light of COVID-19? Does anyone like to answer that? Does anyone know much about the fish industry, or just, that sort of industry in general? Anyone? Okay.
I'm afraid I don't know very much about the fish industry.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on to another question. This one is for Mark. How do you think the reality will change for organizations like news media outlets? We have seen a lot of them in Kenya, like NMG and RMS, laying off staff. What is the opportunity here for upcoming media organizations, especially in the new media, blogging, microblogging, vlogging, one-man media companies in this field?
Yeah, thank you, Toyin, and yeah, my thanks to Ebon and Jason. Those were some really great presentations. Thank you. So I think to take on this question, I'm actually set to start in about September with a course for the BBC and a number of the African stations that they partner with on this topic. So my team and I have developed a kind of curriculum of sorts to address it. But I gave a talk to about 30 different broadcasters from the continent maybe about a month ago, and it's really tough for them, because on one hand the word to advertisers has been, studies have shown that in a recession, in a normal recession, it's actually the time to advertise. As other people pull out, you're supposed to keep spending. And what at least that does is it keeps the media houses, the broadcasters, the TV and mainstream media stations actually continuing to be liquid, and reaches, tens of thousands or millions of people at a fraction of the cost when it's normally competitive. But because this is a challenge of supply and demand, some people who have supply chains going to China have had that affected. Some people who need cash flow to go about that same provision and securing the supply, they've been affected. So media stations are struggling, even if they offer flexible payment terms. And so there's a term that a gentleman called Moses Kemibara had him say. He said, he called it CADIT. So it's COVID-aided digital transformation, a bit of like an acronym. But the idea there was that this is just going to completely upend the media business. And so we've seen that. We've seen, at least if I could give you some quick Kenyan examples, K24, which is one of the media stations here, they tried to merge with another station. It didn't, it fell apart at the negotiation table. They let go of all the high salary, big on-air talent. And then they raided a small, okay, I say raided, they went and made strong offers to an up and coming crop of people. We're talking about moving from a 30 or 40 something year old, top class, million followers, prime time personality, to basically an entry-level person who's ready to fight it out and will come in at less salary. So people are taking some pretty radical steps. Then Nation Media has, said goodbye to some of the famous faces we know. And they're essentially starting from scratch. I mean, I think if you take the Nation Media group, they had a $20 million investment in a new printing press just a few years ago. So, you sit with kind of challenging times for them, wondering what the next decade looks like, but it's a tough time. If you're on the digital side, however, this is a time to try to experiment. People have more available disposable time. The only thing and challenge that I still put out there, and we have I can drop it in the comments, we have a report, if anyone's keen to look at this, a public and free report about how in Africa, the currency isn't just time. I think in the West, people normally say, hey, you have all the time in the world, but you choose to spend it in a few places. Here in Africa, because we're a prepaid continent, there's also the aspect of mobile bundles, the actual megabytes it takes to stay connected. And too often we actually forget this part. Say, oh, but I gave it to you for free, it's online. Well, it actually costs me several megabytes to consume it, and I need power for my device, I need battery life, I need several things based on my phone. And so these unexpected costs typically that I find we can forget. And so South Africa has done some very provocative work. There's an organization there called Bainu, and this is my last comment. And what they've done is they've started what's called like a data-free movement. So they have a messenger which doesn't consume my data, but it's free to use. Imagine consuming all the videos and images you want on WhatsApp without using your megabytes, or surfing on Facebook, or visiting different parts of the web. And so hopefully over the next decade, we've been encouraging clients who can afford it, who still have demand for their services and have supply, that maybe what you do is you take out the data barrier. And that could be some level of innovation we see in the coming weeks, months, and hopefully years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your response. We'll move on to the next question. This one is to Ebon. As you can imagine, because she shared her personal story, there are a couple of questions that were asked directly to her. So I would just kind of maybe lump two questions in one. And the first one is, what is your expansion plan? So that's one question. The next question is related to your experience, that you're going through now. Did you have to hire more people to meet the demand? And how did you solve the challenge of importing your packaging? So maybe those are three questions in one.
Okay. Wow. Okay, so we have importing your packaging, hire more staff.
How did you do?
An expansion plan. Okay, I did go into the chat box and try to answer a number of these questions, but I will. And one of them was.
Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So yes, we definitely had to hire more staff, because we kind of went from 0 to 100 very quickly. And also, because you're producing so much from coconuts, we had tons and tons of coconut shells. We always had the plan to produce activated charcoal from coconut shells, and we immediately had to start doing that, because you'll find that in Nigeria, most of the activated charcoal is imported. And it's used for water purification, it's used in hospitals, it's used for cosmetics, and all of that. So we had to create a whole new department, build special kilns, and do all that. So basically a new product was created and launched even in this time. We had to hire more people for that. Expansion plan is, we've seen that, and one of the other questions I noticed in the chat box was, what have I learned? What is the biggest lesson? For me, it is diversifying your distribution channel. I think I said that in my presentation, not to depend on just the one, or supermarkets, or whatever you feel is that successful distribution outlet, and just make sure that you have like a whole lot of other options. And so that's what we're doing. We're building, basically we do something called start, stop, continue. What works, continue. What doesn't work, stop it. And what you need to start all together. We've accidentally come upon this new thing where people are using their own personal media channels to become distributors, and we're actively developing more of such people. So that immediately gives us 100 new distributors, conveniently marketing from the comfort of their couches, making a profit and pushing our products. So that is one of our expansion plans. and the other question of importing packaging. Sadly, so remember I said we made a big investment into the packaging, because that's a really big part of the work we do. My background is media, so I'm really particular about the way our products are presented, you know, and all of that. And again, I'm happy to share our catalog with you so you see what it looks like. You can immediately click and see like our food range and all our, you know, cosmetic range. So the packaging for our coconut cinnamon balls came in from abroad just before the pandemic, but we ordered a really large volume. So we actually do have enough packaging for a while. And you know what we do in the same, like we do in the media world, is to make sure you should sort of plan ahead. And then also we're talking to local manufacturers of packaging, as long as we can get the same sort of quality that we get, because the packaging is critical to success in retail. And if we can get that same sort of quality in Nigeria or on the continent, we're more than happy to move in that way. I hope I've answered all the questions.
Thank you. Yes, you have. Now, the next set of questions will go to Jason. So, Jason, people found your presentation also very interesting. And the question is, do you have any feedback so far on the impact of your tools on MSMEs that have adopted, you know, your tools? And then, you know, another question around what do you think will forever change the way business is run due to COVID-19?
Thank you, Toyin. So the first question, actually, I think Dirk-Jan has already answered well. Thank you, Dirk-Jan. And hi. So from Power Internet, and we go back away with Dirk-Jan and team, but I think his response is spot on. It's one key part of the answer is we've not given anybody an elevator, you know, to get you from one floor to another. But what we've done is show you the staircase, and you know it's up to you to walk or not. And so unfortunately, what we can't do is solve your business problems. What we can give you is clear help on how to solve your business problems, and then it's up to you to walk the steps or not. What are some of the most compelling ways that entrepreneurs have found that you know our toolkit has helped? So one, just an increased sense of confidence, you know, just to say it's not just me. I'm understanding, you know, my business situation. I'm understanding the decisions that need to be made, and you know, don't underestimate the power of clarity. You know, just understanding the situation I'm in, the decisions that have to be made, my option set. So that's one. Number two, better interactions with investors. Because, you know, I guess what the field guide brings is a very pragmatic way to lead your business, you know, through a likely liquidity crisis. By doing all the things you need to do as a CEO to manage liquidity, ranging from the strategic level down to tactical level. And it is what investors want to see. What investors want to see in these times is good management. And most of us as entrepreneurs, and I'm an interesting cat because I'm an entrepreneur and I help entrepreneurs, so I can see from both sides of the table. And with my entrepreneur hat on, I know we're hustlers. We hustle. And but what investors need to back small businesses with liquidity is they need to see responsible management. And so one of the things that our toolkit has given is if you want to call it that, a bridge between what investors want to see and how entrepreneurs natively operate in crises like this. And that's the bridge of effectively handling the decisions that need to be made. So understanding, you know, kind of that investors want to see a contingency plan with scenarios where the revenue drivers have been thought through, the cost structure has been thought through. We know what decisions we're going to have to make if X happens and Y happens. And that has resulted in the relationship between investors and entrepreneurs being much more effective, which has resulted in liquidity. You know, so investors being willing to support, you know, their existing portfolios faster because they're more organized. So I'd say those are the, you know, the most common comments that we get. And then to be honest, most entrepreneurs have said that the peer sessions have been more valuable because that's where they get to talk to people like them living through what they're going through. And that's where the lights went on for us, that a lot of entrepreneurs are needing group therapy in these times, times of lockdown where they can't kind of meet with and talk with the people they're used to talking with. And they're living through something that is excruciatingly difficult. For many, it's their life's work. It's decades of blood, sweat, and tears that they're staring down the barrel of losing. And that is like an extraordinarily difficult place to be if you're the main breadwinner and this business is your retirement plan. And so that peer group setting has been also extremely valuable.
Thank you, Jason, for that insight, and also for just shedding more light in terms of the mental health. It's a holistic approach that you have to use with owners of businesses that are struggling during this very difficult times. So we'll move on. At this point, I would like to open the floor for one of our participants to give us some comments, and then we'll go back to answering more questions. So again, if you have any last minute questions, burning questions that you want to ask all of our speakers, they're here. We're going to go on for another 15 minutes. We're now at the top of the hour. So please write your questions into the chat box, and we'll try to address all of that. But now I'd like to turn over the floor to DJ Coleman. I hope I pronounced your name right.
That was flawlessly, Toyin. Thank you very much. So thanks for the moment. I appreciate. Allow me to try and glue the stories of all three speakers together, if I may. I think Mark, in his report, he actually mentioned Pro Internet, the company that I'm one of the co-founders of. And he was spot on in his analysis that indeed for companies like us, there is pent-up demand, which is great in itself. There is, because of the working from home situation and the learning from home situation, there's also increased usage of the network, which causes challenges because you need to build a more resilient network. And then gluing it to Jason's story, cash is still king. We're a startup, so we're not EBITDA positive. We're not throwing out big wads of cash. We don't have deep pockets. So we don't know how long this crisis is going to last, and we need to survive with what little cash we have in the bank. But that means that you have to be, say, frugal is probably the best word. And although Eben says that say, great product and great distribution creates capital, in our case, being in the internet industry, we need capital to build, to deploy product and to deploy distribution network. And oddly enough, in this time when there is pent-up demand, every customer that we connect on day one costs money. And this customer will only start throwing off cash after several months. So it is very contrarian, but we need to be very efficient and actually be smart in how many customers we connect in these times, because every customer on day one is causing a negative cash dip. So yes, we see pent-up demand, fantastic. We see a 25% spike in our network utilization, which is causing challenges in itself because it's not a piece of wet string as in fiber, but we use wireless technology to connect our customers, and that provides challenges in itself. So it's interesting times that we live in, and cash is king. We see that there is still some investors sloshing around, but a decision-making process, understandably, is taking a lot longer than initially anticipated. So not only interesting times that we live in, as Confucius said, but also interesting times ahead, I would argue. So fingers crossed and butt cheeks clenched in this case.
Thank you very much for that comment of tying all the speakers' thoughts together for our listening audience. As we move on, one more question for all all the speakers can actually address this question. What specifically can investors do to support MSMEs during this time and beyond? And maybe we can take it in order of your presentation. So Mark goes first, and then Ebon, and then Jason.
Sure. I think, yeah, for myself, I'll speak. I'll give, I guess, my caveat at the beginning. So my business, Nendo, doesn't have any leverage right now. We don't have any facilities or any loans or anything of that nature. But I have. I sit on the board of like a fintech, and I have a portfolio of companies I advise, and some are venture funded. So I might speak with that sort of hat, and sometimes matchmaking investors to some deal opportunities from my network. I think Jason nailed it, right? Like it's cash. I mean, I know I won't say which startup, but one of the startups that I had their logos up here, which is a very big name across Nigeria. Well, emerging in Nigeria, but better known in East Africa, has actually put a number of its staff on furlough, on unpaid leave, and that's a that's a company that's raised millions of dollars, because it just shows the extent of the challenge right now to conserve cash. And they were in the middle of a fundraising round, just like DJ said, slightly cold feet on the investor side. So to me, it's cash, and I think it's also exploring what that instrument is. So maybe it's different forms of debt, or I think that the biggest challenge here is it depends on the business model, right? You don't want to throw good money after bad, but you do want to take a bet on the entrepreneur, but no uncertain about COVID. So I'd say for me, it's a bit complicated. If it's an investor, I'm not telling you to go out and do a fire sale or any hostile takeovers or anything like that. But some people would say that that's good business, that you kind of wait and get things at a lower price. But I would say, I think just cash, just providing cash in the runway to last long enough to get things figured out for people who have that appetite for risk, or to purchase and to get in the driver's seat as well. This is a time for investors to be shopping around and looking.
Ebon, over to you.
Okay. For me, our business is what we're building is a family legacy business, right? I mentioned that my children started this as a joke, and I saw potential, because they started it as coconut banana bread, right? They were tiny kids, cute little kids selling stuff. And then we started looking at, okay, if you can get in the door with one product, what are other products from this coconut you can get in the door with? And so we're pretty particular about who we're going to bed with in terms of money. What we've done is built products and really build a solid structure, so that we can pick and choose the capital that really is in line with our vision. So yes, we've got a significant amount of funding, which is debts really, through over the last 6 weeks or so. And again, we are clear about our growth, and our growth path, and we will take that money that is in line with our vision. I'll give you an example. 80% of our workforce are women, and it's deliberate, and we're not going to change that. So we have certain values, and we found in the past that we've had people offer us money or capital, and our values were not aligned. So for us, we're just really focused on building that legacy, because we intend to be here over the next 100 years and beyond. And so that's really our approach to it.
Thank you. Jason.
And I wish I had a better answer than I do. This is a complex issue. The term investor implies people managing money for gain. These are times where it is hard to profit from funding small businesses that are largely struggling and on decline, as opposed to growing and creating equity value. And so really we're asking, other than the Ebons of the world are doing really well, like how do we leverage the capital in the hands of investors to be supportive in a way that is not profit maximizing, because of the nature of the times we're in that are fundamentally unique. And even when we do that, it will, only make a small dent in the kind of liquidity needs of the MSME world in general. But I think there are things investors can do. I think investors with their existing portfolios certainly can help them with creative funding mechanisms that are patient, and by that I mean, for example, allow valuation to be determined in a year's time. Safe notes, for example, so that you don't have to take fire sale pricing as an entrepreneur on the ropes, and either you take the money or you go out of business. So extending gracious offers like that, and look, if in a year's time they still haven't managed to raise capital on better terms, then it is what it is. Number two, investors can help entrepreneurs be in a way mercenary about managing their liquidity, because entrepreneurs are facing extraordinarily difficult decisions that impact the lives of people they care about, in some cases family, friends they've worked with for years, and have to let them go for the survival of the business and protection of the jobs of 50 or 70 or 80% of their staff. Investors can support them in that process and can bring the clinical financial point of view to the table and help entrepreneurs with the courage and conviction to take the actions that are needed for the long-term survival of their business. And as much as that may seem money oriented and not caring for people, it really is the opposite. You sometimes have to let the few go to protect the jobs of the many. And it's helpful for an entrepreneur, CEO, founder to have that voice bringing them conviction to do what's helpful and right. Thirdly, you can connect. Investors can connect.
That is when Kai Bide, San Bide there before. Okay.
Please mute Mr. Dominic. Hello, Mr. Dominic. Please put your phone or your computer on mute. We can hear you. You're talking over the speaker.
Yeah, Toyin, he's been muted. Please go ahead, Jason.
All right, great. Yeah, so that third point I was making is connect entrepreneurs to resources. These are desperate times. Entrepreneurs need to be connected to other sources of funding. Investors are in their own bubble, or community of people with money, and that's very valuable to entrepreneurs who are mostly not in that community. Some are, most are not. And so connecting to the appropriate sources of funding and liquidity at these times. But I think also, investors can represent the cause of MSMEs to policymakers and sources of capital, painting a picture of the reality of MSMEs. And, that reality is we as investors can go this far to be supportive of MSMEs. And at that point, it just stops making any sense for capital to go further. And here's the rest of the gap that we need to be closed by policymakers, governments, DFIs, etc. And representing that picture clearly is something hard for atomized entrepreneurs to do, but easier for a community of investors who can aggregate the picture to do. So there are some of the things that I think investors can do.
Thank you. Thank you all for answering that question. There's another question that I'll have to ask, and again, if you can, just wait another 3-4 minutes for us to wrap up session today. But one question that I thought, I think again is good for everyone to answer has to do with what can SMEs do to better collaborate. So there's now a situation where people people's livelihood and the businesses are not pivoting as quickly, or people are struggling, the SMEs are struggling. There's issues around access to finance and cash flow. So is this an opportunity for people to join forces, for SMEs to join forces? What do you all think about maybe a movement around SMEs collaborating and working better together around their different products and services that they provide?
Yeah, I think I'm happy to take that if we're taking it in the order we just went in. Yeah, I think I'd say this is definitely a time if the just like everyone said, if the values are aligned, then your mergers and acquisitions conversation amongst SMEs could be a way of ensuring survival. I know I've had conversations with some fellow peers in their respective lines of business about just working together, and do people come together to create a center of excellence? Because you might have spent the last 5 years with somebody competing, and for your mutual survival, this might be the time to explore, are we better together, and what would something like that look like? And yeah, I mean, I've always stayed in touch with a couple people, and even if we're not exchanging like intimate information, the idea is there that we have we compete against each other when the opportunities and the clients are on the table, but we talk, just because I'm always like, I don't have enemies. We're peers and we can all grow. So I don't know if that applies in some cases, but that would be one way. So mergers and acquisitions. The other way would be I think just in different parts of the supply chain. You want to start doing deliveries in your small business, no reason that you shouldn't partner with a delivery or courier partner, and kind of investing in getting your own motorcycle and trying to get like a rider and so on, just to use up whatever the spare capacity that they have. So there's some of that peer-to-peer when you're looking at either deliveries to you of inputs or deliveries to customer in the last mile. Opportunities kind of abound or are there for collaboration and for taking advantage of. So yeah, those would be some of the ones that I would raise and think could be areas to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Ebon.
Okay, so this is an area I'm really passionate about, and I'll tell you, I believe in the power of pooled resources, right? So we have 2 factories, and we have an admin office in Lekki Phase 1, which costs us a significant amount every year. But since March, I have not been into that office. And then the office is telling me, oh, it's time to pay up rent. And I'm saying to them, I'm not going to do that because I don't need the last 4 or 5 months. And this is what I suggested to them. Find 50 entrepreneurs who will pay 1/20th of what I paid. And all I need is a place to drop off my letters and pick up my letters. Come in once a quarter, once a month for a meeting. And that's all. So the first point I would make is cut the fat. And that's what we did. We cut the fat. This is COVID, and cash is king. We've all said that. And everywhere you do not need to spend money, don't do it. And so if you can pool resources together in one space, 50 entrepreneurs can split the cost of one office room that, and save some cash to do other things. So that's one. The second thing is, I totally agree with you, Mark. We have spent, because my husband owns a pest and germ control company. They've been producing hand sanitizers, face shields, doing disinfectation and all of that. So between my company and his company, we are constantly using delivery bikes every day. And we know the amount we've spent on that month in, month out since March. And so I said to him and to other entrepreneurs, why can't 10 people come together, get a bike, pay a bike person, and let that person, so we've got basically another company, right, in this sort of distribution logistics situation, and that bike or 2 bikes or 3 bikes, as the case may be, is servicing these 2 or 5 or 10 companies. That's 2. Online platforms, right? I've said this a number of times on this call. We've got people who are using their WhatsApp station. I have 300 views on my WhatsApp, right? So if I put your business on my WhatsApp and I'm promoting it, you have not just your network, you have the 300 eyes that I see in mine. So we've created, I chair a women's group in Nigeria, and we have chapters all across Nigeria. We have the things that we do every single day of the week, but guess what? Thursday is our market day, and it's the most enlivened day, right? Everybody comes out of the woodwork. So I said to them, why don't we set up a platform just for marketing for all the chapters and just sell there all day, every day? We pay a token for the year and we do that. So that's an online e-commerce platform for a group of 300 people, and you're trading amongst one another. And then finally, we are constantly going into new outlets to get our products in. Rather than me hire one person to get my products into these new outlets, why can't 5 businesses come together and pay the salary of 1 marketing personnel? You're going there anyway. So why can't you do it for 5 other businesses? So rather than me pay, $100, for this person's salary, 5 people can chip in $20. You get in there, get the job done. And so we need to kind of look at ways to cut the fat and be a lot more effective than we've been. We've been incredibly wasteful as humans, and we can do a lot better. So that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you. I think we all heard your passion around this collaboration and how you can work together. So thank you for that. And Jason, over to you. And maybe in addition to answering this question, you can also add what else you think needs to be done to support SMEs. Is there any other thing that, beyond what you're already doing for in 10X? Is there anything else that you think needs to help leaders of SMEs and just SMEs in general during this time and beyond?
Let me start with unmuting myself, and let me start with that second question. I think Eben and Mark have given great contributions on the previous question. I've jotted down some thoughts in the chat box in response to Frank's question there. I think, again, with cash being king, everything we can do around facilitating revenue, turnover. So creating market access for small businesses is a really big deal. Everything that you can do to drive a shift of buyers from buy from the big guys to buy from the small guys, buy from the international guys to buy from the local guys. Everything we can do to just generate revenue for small businesses is going to be number one, and sometimes that's external to the small businesses. So it's kind of in the ecosystem, the culture surrounding small businesses, but a lot of it is internal to the small businesses. So a lot of small businesses have to do what Eben has described, that people have to pivot. They have to figure out ways of selling something and earning money. And so for micro entrepreneurs, that's just kind of it's hustling and being creative and hustling, and they're being part of networks, communities of people, where I can be, have my finger on the pulse of what are the opportunities, what are people needing, what is no one doing. Kind of being networked is super valuable. For more established small businesses that have got they're registered, they have got a product, a service, staff, they need to pivot. They need to figure out and not all of them, the most adversely affected, need to figure out the future of their business, and so they need to rapidly go through firstly a tactical pivot thought process, and then a longer term business model reinvention process. And there aren't that many entrepreneurs that are really great strategic thinkers. They're intuitive visionaries more often, and so bringing great strategic tools that demystify those what can be intimidating, complex strategic thinking processes, and then again very often just with good mentors who can help them walk the road of figuring out a pivot and or a longer term business model adaptation. A lot of small businesses are going to have to let people go. That often has to happen in the context of labor laws. They need HR support doing that right, creating the most resilient possible organization on the other side. And, so there's a lot under this banner of HR support, particularly in the right sizing context. We all know businesses are going to have to figure out how to trade under various types and degrees of lockdown. That you can't speak to your customers in the same way via the same channels. And so lots of entrepreneurs who've never been forced to before need to learn how to digitize different aspects of their business. Documentation, marketing, communication, sales. So digitization support is a big need for many entrepreneurs. And then very specifically digital marketing for those used to actually just speaking to people in their networks and or, let's think of a street vendor, just, speaking to customers on the streets. Learning how to communicate using digital channels is a new frontier for many. So those are examples of areas where expertise is needed to help entrepreneurs facing new challenges for the first time. But there's a litany of other similar kind of topics. Those are the most commonly shared ones in our experience that are non-financial in nature. I haven't even included there the financial liquidity management, scenario planning, cash flow forecasting, which investors need if they're going to put money into a business. So those are, very big needs as well. And so because it's hard for me to summarize into 2 or 3 points, I just put, and then a lot of other things. Forgive me for that out. But yeah, in summary, small business need a lot of help in this time in a range of expertise areas. And that's why I like the role of the mentor. The mentor can help them know what to prioritize right now. Help be an outside soundboards, helping them prioritize and stack rank the things they're going to do, and then help them take the first step to connect with the expertise they need on a particular topic. Think of it like a quarterback, or in rugby, a scrum half. The playmaker that helps the entrepreneur connect with the right resources at the right time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your insights and perspective as we move forward. I really appreciate everyone even staying with us beyond time. We've come to the end of our series. Would like to really thank our sponsors, the United States African Development Foundation, and I would like maybe to turn it over to my colleague Nancy to say a little bit about the US ADF before we wrap up for today, before we thank everybody. Nancy?
Hi, everybody. This has been such a wonderful discussion today, and I think particularly so because each and every one of our speakers is also a small business owner. So I think the information that has been shared here has just been very, very valuable. Thank you very much to all our speakers, and thank you to all our listeners, participants. I wanted to make a small plug for one of our biggest funders, USADF. A lot of people know USAID, but not USADF. They're, over the last 5 years, they have actually invested over $115 million directly into 1,000 African-owned entities, businesses. So they're a wonderful partner to have. They support us in many ways, and we thank them very much. As we close this webinar, I just want to mention that we have the last in the series, in this particular series of webinars will be next week. We hope all of you will join us. We'll send out a flyer for the next webinar, but we thank you so much for supporting us through these. This is, as Toyin said, this is the 9th in our series, and it's been a wonderful journey of learning and sharing. We will be putting out, we will publish a white paper on all the things that have been discussed over the past few weeks, just to be able to have something that we can share with all our participants. So thank you very much. I think the next slide shows contact information in case any of you want to contact us. At the bottom, you'll see my name, Toyin, Frank. You can contact us at any of those, using any of those email addresses. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and stay safe.